Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Lighthouses of the Great Lakes, Ontario, Erie, Huron, Michigan, and Superior by Ray Jones. This is what the cover looks like. We have a beautiful shot of a lighthouse on the front. We have an aerial shot of the lighthouses on the back, and it's a thin book but very, very interesting. In this review, I'm going to be covering what's in the book, what I liked about this book, as well as one aspect I think this book could have improved on or executed better. But first of all, if you are new here, I post new book reviews almost every single day, so if that sounds interesting to you, feel free to stick around. Let's jump into what is in Lighthouses of the Great Lakes. So first of all, lighthouses to me have a very interesting dual nature. Lighthouses, I live in the Midwest and have an opportunity to visit many lighthouses, and lighthouses are usually visited on these beautiful sunny summer days. The sun is shining, there's families at the beach, there's people picnicking, and they look absolutely gorgeous against clear skies, against these massive lakes in the Midwest of the US as well as southern Canada. So we have that aspect where they're beautiful, fun family outing locations. However, lighthouses exist as navigational aids and ways to mark location. This was more important before we had modern technology to guide ships. So they have a strong historical connection to things like maritime disasters and storms, preventing disasters from occurring, as well as being the site of maybe a previous disaster which prompted a lighthouse to be built in that particular location. So they are simultaneously places where a lot of people have beautiful family pictures and they're really interesting, pretty places to look at, but they're tied to these maritime disasters or they mark very dangerous locations on these Great Lakes. So with this dual nature, I feel like it makes lighthouses a very intriguing and interesting subject, and you're going to get a lot of history out of each lighthouse because of that connection to things like major storms or maritime disasters. So the book goes through in a very clear, organized way lighthouses along the shores of the Great Lakes. All of the Great Lakes are featured here on the front. They're listed in this text, Ontario through Superior, and the author does move through them in an order by lake. So each section is set up as so. We have a introduction to the lake. So each lake, they give a little bit more of a interesting name. So this is Romantic Beacons of the Gateway Lake, referring to Lake Ontario. So there is a page like this, which will outline the lake that we are discussing. Then the author dives into not every lighthouse, but a selection of lighthouses from that lake. Each section on the lighthouse talks about the history of the lighthouse, the current status of the lighthouse, historical events that surround the lighthouse, as well as information if you yourself are looking to visit. And they do this in a rather concise way. So we have one page or 2 pages per lighthouse. This one, there's a back page. We see the author is really squeezing quite a bit of information into just one page. Kind of the key details, the highlight reel, if you will, of these lighthouses. And we see there's a lot of beautiful photography that accompanies them. And I think it is, again, interesting that the author chooses to feature these lighthouses in these beautiful full summer days that I was talking about before. So I think that the order that this book progresses in makes sense. I think that the order makes sense, and as we move into the next lake, we'll see that we have another entrance page or another beginning introduction page to introduce the next lake. Here we are in Michigan, Romantic Beacons of the All-American Lake. This is Lake Michigan, and again, we go right through to discussing different lighthouses on that lake. So that section I think is very well organized. The book primarily focuses on US lighthouses, but there is a feature on Canadian lighthouses, the lighthouses that are on the Canadian shores of the Great Lakes. Of the Great Lakes, 4 of the 5 also border Canada. The only one that doesn't is Lake Michigan. Hence, I think the reason they gave that name, the All-American Lake, to Lake Michigan. But the Canadian lighthouses start on page 101, and they all are grouped. They're grouped in this heading of Romantic Beacons of the Imperial Coast. And similarly, they have photography and a little bit of text section on the lighthouses. I think this book is the perfect little introduction to lighthouses on the Great Lakes due to the size. It's just over 100 pages, so it's not like you're reading a tome or getting weighed down in the historical detail of the lighthouses themselves, but due to the size, It's also not very comprehensive. I think that's fine. I think there's a niche within nonfiction to fill for books that are just primers, beginners, people who have a casual passing interest in lighthouses, who don't want to read 700 pages of history of every lighthouse along the coast of the Great Lakes. There is a role for that sort of book too. There's definitely people who are very enthusiastic about lighthouses who will happily devour a book like that. But this book is to be an introduction. This book is to be a guide for people who are maybe interested in the region and kind of want, again, that highlight reel of the most interesting lighthouses, at least in this author's perspective, and the most interesting historical facts that occurred around these lighthouses. I feel like the organization made sense, the way we move from lake to lake in that order, and from the areas of the Great Lakes that I am familiar with, I think they did a good job of selecting relevant lighthouses that had important historical facts associated with them. And I did appreciate the attention to detail that explained if you wanted to visit, how to do that. So if you were looking to visit the Great Lake region and you had an interest in lighthouses, this could be a great place to start to plan your trip, because you would get the historical facts, the necessary information in almost a guidebook-like style, while also knowing whether or not you were allowed to visit or how you could visit some of these lighthouses that were in this book. Now, there is an improvement that can be made, and I'm going to start by referencing my book review on Lake Superior Secrets. This was a book review that I did on my channel recently, and I really praised that book because I felt like the author, while talking about Lake Superior, gave an equal weight or equal focus to both the Canadian side of the lake and the American side of the lake. I almost said European for some reason, the American side of the lake. And I do find that books that discuss the Great Lakes region, or really any region that kind of straddles the national border between the US and Canada, usually tends to pick one side or the other to focus on when writing that book. And that makes sense. I think it also tends to be in line with the nationality of the author. A Canadian author might have more experience or understanding of the history of the Canadian side of the lake and may write more on that, while an American author may have more of an understanding of the American side of the lake and may write more on this. And I think it's fine to have those separations. I just felt like the one book I read, Lake Superior Secrets, did a really good job of balancing that. This book, as previously mentioned, really focuses on the American lighthouses and the American side of the lake, which is fine. I am okay with a focus that tends to be on more on one side of the border than not. There is that section on Canada, and I feel like this is where my complaint comes in. I feel like the focus of this book is primarily American lighthouses, or lighthouses on the US side of the border of these Great Lakes, and that's fine, but I wish that Canadian section just feels weak. It feels like an addition. It feels like something was added at the end of the book last minute, sort of rushed. We're just going to put some stuff on there. There wasn't as much photography, there wasn't as much information, and I think all of that kind of played into that section being a weaker part of the book. I think the author should have done either one of two things. The first is they should have committed more to the equal treatment. They should have looked at lighthouses on both sides of the lake, or explained if, I don't know, for whatever reason, there's fewer remaining lighthouses on the Canadian side. They made that abundantly clear and they tried to balance it. I wish they had interspersed that throughout the book with more equal weighting and advertised it as is Lighthouses of the Great Lakes. And I think the branding on the front is really what annoys me the most, because this isn't branded as American lighthouses on the Great Lakes or US lighthouses to see in the Great Lakes or anything like that. The book is trying to advertise itself for all Great Lakes, and yet it doesn't do as good of a job on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes. So I think it either needed to brand differently, or it needed to really rework that focus on the Canadian lighthouses to give it more equal weighting. So I think those were the two paths I wish the author had taken and done differently in this book to be just a little bit stronger of a book. But overall, the photography was excellent, the information was excellent. It's a great little guidebook for American lighthouses. I would say American lighthouses. I feel like the Canadian side was a little weaker, but if you're looking to visit this region, or if you live in the Great Lakes region and you want to visit lighthouses, this little book by Ray Jones, Lighthouses of the Great Lakes, make sure I say everything correctly, is an excellent guidebook. And overall, I feel like, despite some complaints and weaknesses that I felt the book had, overall was a very strong book and a very enjoyable read. If you enjoy lighthouses, if you've read books on lighthouses, or if you just have anything to add to this conversation, please put it in the comments below. I love to receive comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.